Get a little water too. Okay. So let's talk about fall gardening. I think a lot of folks are used to just gardening in the summer. So that's usually May through maybe September or October. And then they put everything away for the year, and that's that. But it is totally possible to keep food growing year round in East Tennessee with pretty minimal effort, I think. You just have to be pretty choosy about what plants you put in, and then a little bit of season extension equipment, which is just low tunnels in our case. And we'll be handing out that material in September. So you can build your own low tunnels. And with this little bit of technology, I mean, pretty much unless we get some really bad freezes, which we haven't really in the last few years, most things will live through the winter. Most fall hardy plants will live through the winter. And I really love gardening in the fall and winter because it's not hot. There are a lot fewer pests and diseases. There's definitely no mosquitoes flying around eating you. The weeds don't grow as much, and you know, there's other benefits, but as far as I'm concerned, that's all you need to hear, right? Fewer weeds, fewer pests, and you know, you're not sweating bathtub of water every time you step outside. So there are 3 basic concerns in fall gardening, and that is the timing of our first frost, the cooler temperatures, and then the decreasing daylight as we get into the winter. So our first frost is usually sometime between October 15th and, you know, mid-November sometime. There have definitely been years where we didn't get frosts until December, and I've, you know, definitely had pepper plants go in, you know, close to Christmas before they finally died. So you can't count on that, but that's just the, you know, hopefully we, you know, we get a year like that and we can keep stuff going, our summer stuff going really late. We have about 80 days until our first expected frost. So it's totally possible to keep planting certain summer crops that have a really fast turnaround. So this would include like bush beans, cucumbers, summer squash, edamame, etc. And what you're looking for is something that's going to mature in, you know, around 50 or 60 days. You don't want to get summer crops maturing, you know, close to that 80-day mark, because we may get an early frost and then you'll lose everything. So, you know, definitely still plant those things if you're wanting them, and check your seed packets for exact info on when your harvest dates are. So, cooler temps, you know, we're closing in on fall, hopefully, and hopefully it'll eventually cool down. And so August is the time to start planting cool season crops, especially ones that have kind of a longer turnaround time that might be, you know, like 80 or 90 days versus like radishes, which may take like, you know, 30 days. I mean, you can put radishes in now, but in August, you want to kind of put your longer season cool crops, and in September, you can put stuff that grows a little faster and likes cooler weather. Definitely keep things well watered because it is still really hot most days here, and they're called cool season crops because they like cool weather, and so the heat's going to stress them out, but just keep them well watered and they will make it into the fall. And then you want to look for varieties that specifically say fall or winter growing. Certain things have, you know, certain crops like broccoli or even spinach have been bred to be more heat tolerant. So and those are good for the spring when we're getting into the summer, but as we're going from summer into the fall and into winter, you want to find varieties that are specifically for fall and winter growing. And then a cool thing about cold hardy crops is that they often get sweeter after it freezes, and this is because sugar is an antifreeze. So in order to protect themselves from you know, from the frosts, plants will produce more sugar. So in the leaves and in parts of the plant, so things get tastier and sweeter. So if you don't like kale in the summer, maybe you might try it in the winter because it will have a better flavor. And then some plants are more frost hardy than others. So cauliflower, for instance, is a cool season crop. It likes cooler weather. However, it doesn't withstand hard freezes very well. So it's kind of hard to grow because it doesn't like cauliflower, it doesn't like heat. So it's hard to grow in the spring. And then in the fall, if you have an early frost, you know, sometimes you lose your cauliflower then. But things like collards, I mean, you could probably get down to like 0 before your collards die. They're really, really hardy crops or plants. So there's this website, motherofahubbard.com, which has a lot of really awesome information on winter growing. And unfortunately, she hasn't updated that website in like 5 years, but it still has a lot of really awesome info on it. So she's got this article in particular, is profiles 10 very cold hardy vegetables that you can grow in your garden over winter. So check that out. And I will hand out, or I'll email out this PowerPoint to folks so you can have this, or you can just Google Mother of a Hubbard. I think this is one of the articles that pops up on the first page of her website. So. And then, so we had, you know, the first frost date, cooler temps, and then day length is our final consideration in fall and winter growing. So plants need 10 hours of daylight to grow, at least. And then in East Tennessee, because of our latitude, the daylight drops below 10 hours around mid-December. So we get less than 10 hours of daylight, and that lasts through about mid-January. When we hit that point again, we're getting increasing daylight. So, so plants will not die when there's less than 10 hours of daylight, but they won't grow anymore. They kind of go dormant for this period. So you want to time your maturity for early December. So for instance, if you want to put in a last planting of like spinach or lettuce or some other cold hardy crop, then you need to time it so that it hits early December and it's mature, because it'll stop growing at that point. So if it's not mature, it'll stay very tiny and won't do anything. So you need to know your days to harvest on the seed packet, and then because the days are getting shorter and things are cooling down, I would add about 2 weeks to that, 14 days to that days to harvest when you're calculating when things are gonna mature. And so I would add 2 weeks onto that date just so that you can account for things slowing down as we get towards that 10-hour mark. So probably late to September, early October is the last major planting I would do. And then you can make a big final planting in the late fall. And so again, all that stuff, in the summer, you kind of have to do succession sowing because things, in the heat, things get diseased, or they get a lot of bugs, or they just kind of get tired out. But they don't do that in the winter. They just kind of hang out, especially if they're under row cover. So you'll make that big final planting to account for several months worth of harvesting. So you make one planting and you get a long harvest period because they're just hanging out like that. And then we'll hit January, we get more sunlight, gradually more sunlight. And then by March, most things that have overwintered will start to bolt. That means go to flower. So that's kind of your timeline there. You'll have, they'll grow a little bit and they'll kind of pick up. But most of them will probably be out by March or definitely by April. Just so you're thinking about when you can start planting spring crops if you want in those spots. So we want to make room for fall crops. Again, we've got stuff coming in a few weeks. And I think if you haven't got an email from Rosie about your fall plant order, feel free to email Rosie and she can get you, a list of what you ordered so that you can see what's, or if you don't remember what you ordered, so you know what's coming. So a lot of summer crops like tomatoes, peppers, squash, pole beans, they will all grow until frost, until frost kills them. But if you wait if you leave everything in your garden and you wait for frost, frost kills things, you're not going to have time to plant stuff for the fall and winter. So you need to think about it now, figure out what you want to keep, what you want to move out, so that you can have a plan, in place and start getting things into your garden in time for the fall and winter. So I totally recommend that you just drop another garden plan like you did in the spring. Make choices about what you want to leave from the summer crops. I wouldn't recommend right now tearing up all of your tomatoes. That would be kind of sad because they just started producing. So, figure out what you want to leave and when you want to time things, and just think about, after the frost, what do you want to be eating out of your garden, and kind of make a plan around that end point and figure that out. So. And then also certain crops are really good for storage if you planted enough of them. I've got a whole list down here, mostly, root crops, alliums, and then some of, and winter squash, pumpkins, and then some things like cabbage and Brussels sprouts actually you can store them. So each one of these, well, there's about 4 storage conditions that plants like. And so this article by Johnny Seeds has a really awesome breakdown of how to properly cure and store each one of these items. So that's one way to feed yourself year round, is to do storage crops and to store them properly. So there's like cold and dry, cold and moist, cool and dry, cool and moist are the 4 conditions. And so and it's fairly easy to get these conditions set up, in a basement or in a root cellar or something, or even in a kind of out of the way cabinet in your house, and so that you can properly store these things. And so they'll hold, a lot of these things will hold, through January, or maybe even, certain things will hold, to March or April pretty well. So, and then a lot of things also need to be cured before they are stored or eaten. So like sweet potatoes, certain winter squash, that kind of stuff. And it explains it in this article, really benefit from being cured properly. They really get their sweetness when they're, when they go through that curing process. And it's usually just a week or 2 that happens in. So, or some winter squash are only good after they've sat for a couple months. So check out this article if you have any of these things in any kind of quantity and you want to know how to store them. It looks like we've got a question. Talk about parsnips. Yeah, parsnips are, I think you still have time to plant them. So it says, they are fairly winter hardy. They have a really long growing season. So if you have seeds, I would get them in the ground right now. I think you can plant them in the spring, but they're also, they're definitely a fall crop. Yeah, no, I would go ahead and plant them now if you have them. Does that answer your question, Tim? Okay. Yes, great. Okay. All right. I'm hitting the next button, but nothing's happening. What's going on here? There we go. Sorry. Another big topic that I get, or question that I get right now, is about seed saving. Obviously, we could spend many hours or days talking about the ins and outs of seed saving. Luckily, there's a lot of really awesome resources online. If you just Google seed saving and the crop that you're interested in, you'll find tons of information out there. So I just wanted to cover a few points because I know folks are really interested in it. So you have to consider whether your variety is open pollinated or it's a hybrid. You can really only save seed from open pollinated varieties. If you try to save seed from hybrids, it could be anything, because it's not a stable genetic line. And you can tell on the seed packet if it says it's an F1, that means it's a hybrid. So you don't want to try saving seeds. And when seed companies use the term heirloom, that often means that it's an open pollinated variety. And then you need to consider the isolation distance each variety needs, and that's something you're gonna have to look up online because each plant is different. But some things like beans or tomatoes are self-pollinating. So there only needs to be 10 or 20 feet in between each different variety. And that's enough distance for, to limit the chance of cross-pollination. But things like corn or squash are pollinated by wind or insects. And so if you have multiple varieties in your garden, they're going to mix. And even like corn, I think you have to isolate it like for a mile or two in order to prevent cross-pollination. So it's hard to say a corn seed and keep it true to variety if you don't know what's around you. And then there's also the option for hand pollination and then bagging flowers. So for squash, for instance, you just go the night before the flower opens and you put a bag over it. And then in the morning you come with a paintbrush and you hand pollinate it with, with the specific male pollen that you want, and then you put the bag back on. So you know that flower just has the pollen that you put on it. And so that's one way to control pollination for a variety like that. But that's kind of more advanced. You can definitely look up a lot more information online about that. But I wanted to mention that there's a couple of things. Like I said, the beans and the peas, tomatoes are super easy to seed save. For beans and peas, you just want to maybe 20 feet between varieties. So if you only planted one variety in your garden, then you're good. Then you want to let the pods dry on the plant, okay? And then after you shell them, once they're totally dry, I mean like kind of crispy and brittle to the touch, you shell them, and then you just want to put those seeds immediately in the freezer. There is often a little weevil that gets into the beans, and so the freezing will kill them. And I've made the mistake before of not immediately freezing beans and have lost a lot of the beans to that little weevil. But the freezing kills it and will save your seeds. And then tomatoes need to be saved through a wet process. So you harvest them when they're ripe. Don't wait for them to get rotten or anything. Scoop out the pulp and the seeds, put it into a jar like in this picture, and then you have to let it actually just sit out. Put some like cheesecloth or something over the top of the jar to keep fruit flies out. And then you just let it sit on your counter for 2 or 3 days and let it ferment. And it may get a little moldy on top, but that's what it's supposed to do. So after 2 or 3 days, take the seeds out, wash them in a strainer, really carefully so that they don't all just go down the drain. But carefully wash them, and then make sure the pulp's not attached to the seeds at all. And then spread it out to dry for, 2 or 3 weeks, and then collect them, put them in an airtight container, and then those can go in the freezer too. So those are 2 pretty easy crops to do. And I think all the beans that we handed out are open pollinated. So those are easy to save. The peas that we gave out are open pollinated. I think the mountain fresh tomato is definitely a hybrid. But like the Cherokee purple, and then I don't remember, the Sun Gold's a hybrid, so that's not, you can't save those seeds. But I think the paste tomato is an open pollinated, so you could save that one too. So anyway, you just have to know if it's, what it is, but these are 2 easy ones to try. So give that a swirl. And then I think peppers are also fairly easy. And then lettuce is another one that's self-pollinated and it's supposed to be pretty easy to save too. I've not tried lettuce before, but it's supposed to be an easy one also. So anyway, just look that up. It's a fun activity, especially with kids. So give it a try. And okay, I'm going to pause for a minute. Anyone have other questions about fall gardening, kind of the ins and outs? That was sort of an overview of what we're doing. And then let me see if I can make sure everyone's allowed to talk. Again, I'm going to let folks allowed to talk, but if you will, just keep your mute button on until you have a question or anything. Oops. All right. Okay, we've got some in the Q&A. Will you explain cover crops? I will later in this presentation. And where did you get the hoops that were in the first photo of the garden you showed us? Ah, you noticed that. Yeah, those are, we have a hoop bender. So those hoops were made out of electrical conduit, EMT. So if you're interested in purchasing EMT, like a 10-foot length of EMT, then you may come, I think the hoop bender is attached to a bench at the high school. So you can, I can meet you there at some point and bend the hoops with you. So that's where we got where I got those hoops. And I'd be happy to talk with you more about that, Jessica, if you are interested. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? All right. Okay. Okay. All right. We're going to get into soil health and no-till gardening. I'm a big fan of going no-till or low-till. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So fall is a really awesome time to start or to convert to start a no-till garden or convert to no-till. Or, you know, it's a good time to add compost. It's a good time to add mulch. And so cover crops. So why should I bother? Well, investing in soil health is an investment in, you know, the future of your healthy plants. So the healthier your soil is, the better your yields are, the fewer problems you're going to have with pests and diseases. It's really a lot of folks, you know, who are invested in this say, you know, become a dirt farmer. If you're caring for the land, if you're caring for the soil, then a lot of the problems will take care of themselves. However, sorry, there was a question. Will we get cover crop seeds? Yes. Sorry, those will be coming in August, on that week, same week as the plants too. Yeah, cover crop seeds. So yes. I will say that working on soil health does take some time, especially in clay soils. I would say you're probably looking at 3 to 5 years of work in order to get your soils into a really good condition. You're probably never going to have dirt that looks like what this hand is crumbling in here, but you are going to get a lot more friable soil by investing in soil health and following some of these techniques. Okay, so this is just an example of the soil food web. So really thinking of your soil and your garden as part of an ecosystem and understanding that there's a lot of things going on beneath the surface of the soil. You know, there's organic matter, which is coming, you know, from compost that you're putting on, but it's also coming from the roots of the plants and, you know, all kinds of, you know, worms and other little critters that are in the soil, you know, living out their lives, are contributing to the organic matter in your soil. And that organic matter is feeding all the other smaller critters. So there's, you know, the fungi and the bacteria and the, you know, protozoa and nematodes and worms and all that. And that's kind of leading up to even to larger animals, you know, insects, and then to birds and mammals that are kind of interacting, you know, at the soil surface or just below the soil surface. So there's really a lot going on, and folks often refer to this kind of web of life as the underground herd. And so I've read that there are 2 tons of light of, you know, microbial and larger life living in the soil per acre. So that's 2 tons per acre, which is about 2 cows worth of creatures living in the soil. So folks in the soil health world refer to this as your underground herd. So you can think of yourself as you know, the manager of this underground herd and trying to keep these critters happy and in balance. And that will go a long way in creating healthier soil, and healthier soil will grow healthier plants. Okay. No, that's not doing what I wanted to do. Okay, sorry. All right, so why should you avoid tilling? Well, tilling causes a lot of problems. Sorry, there we go. It causes degradation of your soil. It can lead to erosion issues. It causes hard pan. So if you've ever noticed in your garden, after you've tilled, if you try to get a shovel down, you hit this hard area and it might feel like you're hitting a rock, but that's actually the hard pan caused by compaction right under where the tiller tines run. And then tilling, it's kind of this vicious cycle with compaction. You start out with, compacted soil, you till, trying to loosen it up, but in the end, you just result in soil that's even more compacted. So you have to come back through with the tiller again, and it's just this, causes more compaction, and it's a bad cycle. Tilling leads to nutrient runoff. So if you're buying, paying money for fertilizer and you're putting it on your garden, tilling is going to create a situation where that often will wash away in a big rain event. So, and then tilling allows nitrogen to off gas faster. Again, nitrogen is critical to plant growth. Probably one of the most critical nutrients in your garden, and tilling uses it up faster. And then tilling will increase your weed pressure. This is because it brings weed seeds up to the surface where they're exposed to sunlight and they will germinate. And then it will increase pathogens in the soil, and not tilling not tilling promotes more fungi in your soil, whereas tilling promotes more bacteria, and can lead to more soil pathogens that way. So working on soil health has a lot of benefits. Having a really healthy underground herd, a really good soil microbe mix, will go a long way in fighting pests and diseases. Having a really healthy soil makes nutrients more available to plants. And then healthy soil is better able to, withstand flooding and also droughts. So it's able to both hold on to water better, but also let it drain better if there's too much of it. So, and all of this happens through soil organic matter. And, or another name for this is carbon, basically soil carbon. So by increasing the soil organic matter, that's basically what soil health is the more organic matter in your soil, the healthier it is. And the good thing about, I know a lot of people complain about clay soil, but the good thing about clay soil is that it holds onto organic matter a lot better than other types of soil. So if you have really sandy soils, it's really hard to get in adequate amounts of soil organic matter, and it often just washes away. So clay holds on to organic matter, so you can really see clay soils, you can really get, 6, 7, 8% soil organic matter, whereas with sandy soil, you might be lucky to get up to like 3% soil organic matter. So that is a benefit to clay, in that it holds on to the organic matter and holds on to nutrients better than other types of soil. So I know it's hard to deal with sometimes, but there is a benefit to it. So, I often, especially when you get to a larger scale, it can be hard to go completely no-till, and I understand that. So, I try to emphasize tilling as little as possible. Will have a lot of benefits to you. Conventional no-till farming relies on a lot of Roundup to kill cover crops, and since we're trying to go organic in this program, we have to rely on using tarps or black plastic to smother the cover crops. So I will say, start collecting tarps now in the winter, so you'll be ready in the spring to kill the cover crops if you use them. So, and while there is a lot of benefit to the soil when you do conventional no-till, using that Roundup I have seen studies where that really knocks back your underground herd, the soil life. It puts a big dent in that, and so it does recover eventually, but I don't think you're getting the full benefits of instituting soil health if you're constantly dropping up a bomb on your soil each year. So in anything that you do in your garden, I will say, consider your underground herd. as much as anything else when you're making decisions about what to do in your garden. Jessica, did you raise your hand? Did you mean to say you raise your hand? Did you say something?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to add that when I was in this before, you had recommended using straw bales on over an area, and I did that, but it takes months and months. So like if there's an area where people would want to plant something next year, get a bunch of those and just set them on your ground on the on the yard or whatever, and you literally don't have to do a thing. I threw out the cover crop seeds that you guys gave us on top of that, and some of it sprouted, some of it didn't, but the next spring all that hay and everything killed all the weeds, and then it got all kind of, I don't know how to describe it, sort of mushy and just after having been rained on and snowed on and all that, and falling apart. And then I just kind of pulled it away and plopped in a bunch of mint, different types of mint, and now I have this huge mint bed in the yard, and I didn't have to till anything, and I have to kind of weed it a little bit, but so I just wanted to mention that as another no-till method that really works super well and was very little effort. Awesome. Other than waiting. You got to plan that out months ahead. Yeah. So that's all.
Thank you. Yeah. I realized I'm not going to speak to that in this one because I was focusing on your existing gardening plot, but that's totally a legit thing. Starting in the fall, just laying down a bunch of material, straw, hay, grass clippings, shredded leaves, whatever. Just if you have a new area that you want to put into garden, I mean, lay that down as thick as you can and just let it sit over the winter, and yeah, it'll kind of compost down in place to start a new plot. That's, yeah, like you said, a super easy way to do that. And I forgot to put that in this slide, so I'm thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so I think I've covered soil health principles probably in every workshop, so we'll kind of go through this quickly, and we'll get to the part on cover cropping in just a minute. So again, there are the 5 soil health principles, which are to keep your soil covered, disturb your soil as little as possible, keep plants growing year round, diversify your plant species, and incorporate animals and manure into your garden. So I like this quote from Ray Archuleta. He's a really awesome soil health guy. Bare soil is, your soil, think of your soil as naked, hungry, thirsty, and running a fever. If you really don't want to see this kind of disturbance, and so keeping your soils covered with mulch. Do I talk about this enough? I'm going to keep talking about it. Or use cover crops, and then in the spring, when you kill the cover crops, you can plant straight into the dead residue of the cover crops, and it's basically like having mulch, except that you don't have to haul anything. It just creates the mulch in place. So keeping the soils covered, reduces weeds. It helps retain moisture in the soil. It keeps the soil cooler, and again, and all of that organic matter that you're putting on top of the soil is eventually going to get eaten by your underground herds. So it's just one more food source for the little critters down there. And then second principle, reduce soil disturbances. So again, you want to reduce or eliminate tilling, and then create these kind of permanent walking and planting areas in your garden, so that you're not stepping on the planting areas, and you can reduce soil compaction. Keep plants growing year round. The soil food web depends on food provided by plants' roots. Roots are not a solid thing. They have a lot of pores in them. And so the roots are constantly leaking sugars into the soil, and that's what's feeding the underground herd in large part. And it's a beneficial relationship for both of them. So the microbes are getting the sugars from the plant roots, and then they are, chopping up and processing nutrients from the soil and feeding that back to the roots for them to uptake. So if those roots are not there providing those sugars, those soil microbes are basically starving to death and will eventually disappear. So, you know, you want to be either growing food crops year round, or if you don't have anything in that spot, planting a cover crop, so that there's something growing in that soil at all times, so that there's something feeding the microbes. And then growing a diversity of plants. Again, different plants are extruding different kinds of sugars into the soil. So having lots of different plants means that, you know, having a diversity of plants means there's going to be a diversity of food, and that's going to promote a big diversity of microbes. So the more you've got going above ground, the more there's going to be going on below ground, and the more resilient, the more diverse and more resilient your microbe population is going to be. And so ways you can achieve this are doing crop rotation, so not planting the same thing in the same spot year after year, doing companion planting, kind of always mixing in flowers and herbs with your crops, and then using cover crop mixes. And this can be anywhere from 2 to 10 species or more cover crop mixes. So cover crops, I think, are one of the key ways to really get this plant and root diversity into your soil. So even if you're not doing companion plant or anything with your food crops, the cover crops will have that diversity that's going to feed the soil. And then incorporating animals and manure. This is probably easier on a farm scale, you know, because you can rotate your cattle or your pigs through a growing area. But on a garden scale, if you have poultry, like chickens or ducks or something, you can let them in at the end of the year. Chickens, you can let them in at the end of the year. I think ducks, and I've even heard guinea hens, are pretty garden friendly, and they will go through and just like eat the bugs out of your garden. So that might be a good benefit if you have those, let them into the garden, but not chickens. Chickens are pretty destructive to your plants. And if you don't have any animals, spreading manure or compost in the fall is a good idea. Manure if it's not already composted, if it's fairly fresh, then it needs 4 to 6 months to decompose before you want to put food crops in that area, just for food safety. And I will say with manure, please always check, make sure you ask a lot of questions if it's not something coming from your own animals, just to make sure that it's not got those persistent herbicides in it that have been sprayed on the field, because those will pass, the animal will eat something that's been sprayed, it'll pass through the animal into the manure, and then it'll be active in the manure for 3 to 5 years. So that's something you really need to check on. You can test it on a plant or two. Tomatoes are really sensitive to those persistent herbicides, so you can test it on have a sacrificial tomato plant, and just make sure that you don't want to spread contaminated manure on your garden. So I always say that whenever I talk about manure. Manure is really good, except now we've got these persistent herbicides that are contaminating it, so just be careful with that. All right, any questions about soil health before we move on to our cover crops? So I feel like I try to hit on soil health in every workshop that we do, just because it's really important. Jennifer, yeah. Can you talk? Do you need to? Oh, yeah, I can't hear. Nope, I can't allow you to talk because it says that. Do you want to just type out your question and I'll answer it in a second? All right, cover crops. So cover crops have a lot of really awesome benefits. They will prevent erosion. So if you just leave your soil bare in the winter and it rains and snows, then a lot of your, if it's just bare, your topsoil is just going to wash away. So cover crops will, help keep the soil where it's supposed to be. They will increase your soil organic matter, which again is kind of the key principle of soil health. And the more soil organic matter you have, the healthier your soil is. And I will say, if you're curious, you can actually get this tested. So if you take a soil sample, you go out to your garden and you take 8 to 10, dig 8 to 10 little holes about 6 inches deep, mix all that together, and you need a soil test kit. You can get one from your extension office, and there should be an option on that test to get your organic matter tested. So if you're curious, you can figure that out. A lot of folks that I see, you know, have between like 1 and 3% soil organic matter. So getting it above 3% is really where you want to hit. And then cover crops, again, they increase soil life and diversity, and they also stabilize and increase nutrients in the soil. So a lot of, again, nitrogen will escape during the winter if your soil is uncovered. It'll kind of off gas into the atmosphere. And so cover crops can help scrounge up nitrogen and concentrate it into the plants and hold it there. And so then when the plants die, when you kill the plants in the spring, that nitrogen just kind of decomposes back into the soil. And if you plant legumes like peas or beans in with your cover crop mix, and they will actually, or even clover, will do it too. They will actually fix more nitrogen into the soil, so you'll have more fertility than when you started with. And then cover crops, because they grow quickly and they cover your garden space, they will suppress weeds in the process. And some cover crops actually, it's a word called allelopathy, and that means that they actively prevent other seeds from germinating. So rye is a cover crop that will do this. So once it starts decomposing in the spring, it will actually prevent weed seeds from germinating. So it has for a few weeks. So it has that benefit. Let's see what. So no need to fertilize in the fall with organic fertilizer. If you are planting fall crops like you know, brassicas or greens, yes, you want to fertilize those. You don't need to fertilize your cover crop seeds. They will take care of themselves. But if you're putting in new crops, then I would give them the same dose of fertilizer that you gave the summer crops. So a couple of tablespoons per plant or per square foot. Okay. All right. Okay, so there are a lot of different types of cover crops, and really the more is better. And I think the mix I'm going to be giving out has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 5 species in it. So that's probably a good place to start. You can do it as little as like 1 grass and 1 legume. That would be pretty awesome. Or even if you wait really long into the winter, like it's November and you haven't, and you have space that you need to cover, you can even rye by itself. That's probably about the only thing that'll grow in November is rye. So even that by itself is fine if it's that late in the year. But there are basically 4 categories. There are grasses, so rye, wheat, spring oats, sorghum, Sudan grass. The last 2 are, especially the last one, is mostly used by like farmers. That's not really something you would necessarily see in a garden. But I'm just mentioning all of these to mention them. So legumes, and again, these are ones that fix nitrogen. So there's all kinds of different clovers. I really like the crimson clover. I think just because it's a really beautiful flower, I don't think you know, it's necessarily any better than the red or the white clover. I just really like the way it looks, so that's the one I always use. Hairy vetch fixes nitrogen. It also really easily becomes an invasive weed, so I try to avoid hairy vetch as much as possible. But there are other parts of the country where it's like less problematic, and so you might see hairy vetch included in a cover crop mix if you're not buying it from a local company. So just be aware of that, and I would not recommend putting that in your garden. Austrian winter peas, a really awesome one for the winter. Soybeans, field peas, cowpeas are good ones. Brassicas, I will include a daikon radish in the mix that I'm giving out. And this daikon radishes are also sometimes referred to as tillage radishes. And this is because these radishes will grow, you know, up to 3 feet long, and they will punch through compaction in your soil. They're really awesome for doing that. And then they will die over the winter when it gets too cold, and they will just rot down, and they will create a lot of organic matter in the soil. And then you can also use other brassicas, mustard, rapeseed, that's also canola. Collards and turnips are also usable. And then it's kind of a fourth catch-all category of non-legume broadleaves, which just kind of means everything else. And that includes mainly, the one I use is buckwheat. That's my favorite for the summer, is putting in buckwheat. If there's a hole in your garden that you need to fill for like 4 to 6 weeks, buckwheat's a really awesome one. This can include flax, sunflowers, marigolds, other edible or flowering crops that may get tossed into a summer mix or something. So grasses really are the backbone of any mix. I mean, you want at least 40% of your mix, and you can probably go all the way up to 90 or 100% of your mix in grasses. And so these plants have really deep roots. They help prevent erosion and nutrient runoff, and so they will kind of go deep into the soil and scavenge nutrients from way down, and they will bring them up into the leaves. And then when they die and rot down, those nutrients are then available for your crops to take. They add a lot of soil organic matter, both from the leaves and the roots. The roots are probably the most important addition of soil organic matter. They will grow really quickly to suppress weeds. They will outcompete weeds. And then again, like I said, rye and also sorghum are allelopathic, which means that they will prevent other weeds from germinating in the soil. So rye is good for overwinter. Like if you have a really bad weed problem and like it's so bad you can't even garden, you know, you can do rye in the winter, and then you can do a crop of sorghum in the summer, and both of those will kind of help kill weeds in that plot. And then you could start the following year, you know, with a pretty weed-free plot. So grasses for the winter, you know, briar wheat. Spring, you can use oats. Summer, sorghum and Sudan grass are good grass mixes. Legumes, see there's a picture of that crimson clover. I just love it. You want your mix to be anywhere from 10 to 40% legumes. These will fix the nitrogen and increase soil fertility. Again, they also, when they decompose, providing more soil organic matter. In the winter, I really like the Austrian winter pea and clovers. I'm just mentioning hairy veg, but please avoid it as much as you can. Spring is good with field peas for early spring, and then summer you can do soybeans, cowpeas, and then there's something called sun hemp. Sun hemp is really useful. I think I've seen farmers use it if you want to add a lot of organic matter to the soil in 1 year. I mean, these things grow, they're like really tall plants. You chop them down, you let them kind of decompose on the soil surface, and you get a lot of organic matter really quickly that way. But again, it grows in the summer, so, and it takes, you know, it has to grow for the full season. So if you have a lot of space and you want to, like, you know, work on soil health in part of your garden and then grow in another part, you could put that part in sun hemp over the summer, and that would be really cool. And then here are our brassicas. I mean, here's a picture of that radish. I mean, it just punches through the soil. And then some brassicas like mustard can be used as natural soil fumigants to kill nematodes. So if you have a bad nematode problem, which we don't really have too many issues with nematodes around here, but further south, they can be a real issue. So there is some cool research that's been done on using mustard as a biofumigant. So you have to be careful with when using brassicas, because for a cover crop, because, you know, they'll harbor the same pests and diseases that that normally afflict you know, brassicas for our crops. So just be aware of that, especially if you have had issues with brassicas. Just be aware that using them may be a little problematic. And then I wouldn't really do more than 5% brassicas in a mix. A little goes a long way with these things. And then I guess I should go back. The downside of these tillage radishes, so they will winter kill, which means that when it gets below like 15 degrees, I think, they will die, which is what you want them to do. And so they will start decomposing in the soil, and so this 3-foot long radish will become a 3-foot long tube full of organic matter. Unfortunately, they smell really sulfurous, so they can kind of give your garden a bad smell over the winter, but it's a good thing in that it will rot down, but it does get a little stinky. Sorry, I'm reading a question. It's about manure. Yeah. I think it's 120 days. Yeah. Prior to harvest. Yeah. It doesn't have to be prior to planting. It just has to be prior to harvest. Sorry if I misspoke. Yeah, you can definitely add manure in the fall, and it should be golden by spring, especially summer, if you want to plant manure in your garden, like fresh manure if it's not been composted already. So fall would be the time to do that, so that you're not kind of getting those pathogens on your plants. Does that answer your question? Yes. Okay, great. All right. Let's see if I can get to the next slide. Okay, non-legume broadleaves, mainly buckwheat. This is a picture of buckwheat. And buckwheat is probably one of my favorite cover crops for the summer. And it just grows really fast. It produces these awesome flowers. Insects, pollinators love buckwheat. So it's really awesome to just use in general. It grows really quickly, so it can suppress weeds in the summer. It's really easy to kill. You just mow it down. And it can really kind of soften and get your soil into a good condition when you use it. So, and this category, like I said, also includes flax, sunflowers, marigolds, chicory is another one. So basically any kind of flowering crop is good to attract pollinators in the summer. And then, leaving the residue of those plants on the soil surface is, again, going to add more soil organic matter as they die. So they're all good. I don't tend to use too many cover crops in the summer because I'm busy growing food, and I only have so much space in my garden, so it's not really focused. So I'm really focused on cover crops in the winter as a really time to kind of maximize what's going on in the soil. So here's the big question is, how do you kill these things? So I totally recommend that you start collecting tarps, black plastic. I mean, even clear plastic's okay. I like the thicker stuff so that so the sun is truly blocked out. And then you need to kind of know when you want to start planting in the spring. And so you want to look back 3 weeks before your planting date. And that's kind of the minimum amount of time that you want to spend. You could kill them a little earlier. But it's a kind of this balance. The more the cover crop is allowed to grow in the soil, like the bigger it gets, the more benefit you're going to get, because the bigger the plant is above the surface, the more roots, there's an equivalent amount of roots underneath the soil. So if you kill the cover crop when it's only a foot tall, you've only got 12 inches of roots growing down there. But if you kill the cover crop when it's 3 feet tall, then you've got 3 feet of roots going down into your soil, and that's so much more organic matter. So it's kind of this trade-off. If you want to plant in the early spring, you have to terminate your cover crops early, versus waiting until April or May when the cover crops are much larger, but then you've kind of lost that spring planting. So if you can do both, that's great. In one part of the garden, you leave that for summer growing, and then kill one part early for spring. So that's kind of a compromise that you can do. So again, just plan ahead 3 weeks, and then I like to just go through and mow or weed eat the cover crop down, and then put a tarp over it, and make sure you weigh your tarp down with something to keep it from blowing away, and just let it block out the light basically for your cover crops, and that will kill them in time. Sorry, hold on one moment. I will be right back. Okay. Sorry about that. My kid is upset about something, but Dada's got him. All right. Okay. So, and you'll see things about crimping your crops, cover crops, in order to kill them. I just have to say it's really hard to crimp them, and it's not. You get more benefits out of crimping your cover crops versus like mowing or weed eating them. But mowing or weed eating them is so much easier. So that's just what I'm going to recommend that you do, just so you're not having to figure out how to properly crimp your cover crops. And so then in the spring, once you have this kind of residue that's dead or dying after 3 or 4 weeks, you can put live plants directly into that residue. So if you're transplanting things, just stick it directly into the residue. If you're sowing seeds, like larger seeds, like squash, beans, corn, you know, bigger seeds, then you can just kind of make, you know, spread the residue a little bit so you've got a nice row down there, and then just you can plant the seeds directly into it. They'll grow through like this corn did in this picture. For smaller seeds, you are probably going to want to, if you're going to directly sow, if you can, transplant as much as possible. But for smaller seeds, you can, you'll have to get the cover crop residue out with a hoe, or if you have a really small tiller like a mantis or something, that's not great, but it makes it a lot easier, especially if you're doing this on any kind of scale, to kind of make a nice seed bed to put your smaller seeds in. So this would be like lettuce, carrots, or like brassicas. If you're doing like baby kale or something, you would want a smoother seed bed than what you get out of just straight cover crop residue. So keep that in mind. And that's the end of my presentation. So questions. Any other thoughts from folks? Let's see if I can let some of you folks. Nope. Let's see. All right. We've got a thank you. Yes, you're welcome. Okay. Oh, we do have something in. Are stirrupos good for working the topsoil? Yes, I love stirrupos. And that would be great for getting your cover crop residue out too. Yeah, definitely. Other questions? Oh, will we get garlic? Yes, sorry. Garlic will come. I think that's probably not going to get shipped to us until October. So normally I try to give it out at our end of season potluck. I give out the garlic. We're probably unfortunately not going to have our end of season potluck, which is sad. So we'll probably just have another day for garlic distribution. Whenever I get the shipping notice, I will get that out. So definitely leave room for garlic in your garden plan. Garlic is super awesome. I love growing garlic. You know, you plant it, it gets planted in October or November, and then it basically just hangs out in your garden until like June or July, and you dig it up and you let it dry out a little bit. And then, I mean, it's really easy in a small space to grow a lot of garlic. So I often will grow like, you know, like 6 months worth of garlic. And it's always a sad day when I run out, but usually by the time I run out, it's around the time to start harvesting it again. So it's really awesome. So definitely leave room for that. I think I can't remember how much I bought, but everyone's going to get at least half a pound of garlic. So any other questions before we get on with our evenings? All right. Well, I'll put this record. Oh, yes, sorry.
Tim said yes about canning. Do you know where we can get a canner tested?
Oh, call the extension office. If you're talking about a pressure canner,
Yes.
yeah, call your extension office, whatever county you're in, and they in non-COVID years they will test them. So, but hopefully they'll know how to help you, or maybe you can drop it off and they can test it. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
Yeah, and they may even have parts for you if like you need a gasket or something. I think I've heard that. Don't quote me.
That'd be great. Okay.
Yeah. You may be able to get parts. And it is, if you have an old canner, for those of you that have no idea what we're talking about, if you have an old pressure canner, it's important to get it tested to make sure that it has a good seal and it gets up to pressure. And I don't think they explode, but I guess that's always a worry with old canners. Pressure canners. So be careful. And hopefully, I'm not going to make it mandatory that folks, attend the attend the cooking classes. It's not something I'm going to be able to enforce, but do check them out if you can, if you have time and that's something you're interested in, because there's several extension offices in the area that are doing online canning classes. So if that's not something you've ever done before, definitely, you want someone to walk you through it the first time you do it. And that's a really great way to do that. And it's fun. I just made, the other night, I just made a bunch of blackberry jam from the patch I've got out back. So I've got a bunch of jam for the year. That's just fun. And yeah, beets, definitely canned beet or pickled beets or something is really awesome. Cool. Any other questions, y'all? Great. I think we're done. Cool. Okay. Well, I will email you all soon, I am sure. If not, actually see you. It was fun seeing everyone